Night shifters ever witnessed a paranormal activity? If so, what was it? I worked at a 7-Eleven. One night I kept hearing what sounded like a little girl crying, but the store was completely empty. Whenever I'd go to the area where I thought it was coming from, I'd hear it from somewhere else. I hope somebody was messing with me, but I'm not sure. I used to work at a 24-hour Subway. I know. Great start to a paranormal experience story. Huh. Well, one day I was doing the dishes, and my coworker was cleaning the toaster oven and bread oven. Out of nowhere, around 3:30 a.m., I heard our door chime go off. Out of habit I say, "Welcome to Subway," as I turn the corner. Nobody there. Coworker gone. I thought, okay, maybe he hopped the counter and went for a cigarette outside, as he did from time to time. Heading back to the sink to finish the dishes, I hear the door chime again. Nobody. Check the bathrooms. Nobody. What the hell? I ignore the dishes and stand at the front counter, eyeing the doors. Couple minutes later, my coworker comes through the back door where we get our deliveries. "Where'd you go?" I asked him, turning towards the back door area to take out the trash. He replies, "Door chime." He does the same thing as me. "Welcome to Subway." Turns corner to see nobody there, but this time the door was wide open. Our doors are weighted to where they'll close on their own if you let go of them. Doors stayed open for a couple minutes as we stared, then suddenly slammed. Not a windy night, and our doors wouldn't even stay open like that on the windiest of days. Have no idea what caused this, or why it happened on that particular night, but after I got a different job I was told it never happened again. Told my boss about the incident and we all looked at the cameras. Nobody could explain it. Edit typo. A lab building where I once worked was the site of a murder-suicide, which happened while I was there. Awful and sad. We didn't have shifts per se, but I had to work late one night autoclaving equipment for the next day's experiment. The autoclave room is right next to the lab where the event took place. I hadn't seen anyone else in the building. After I started the load, I was about to leave the room when I heard a crash outside. I immediately opened the door and saw that all the contents of a table in the hallway had been pushed to the floor. Water bottles, a packet of papers, pens, etc. Since I was right by the door at the time, I would have seen and/or heard someone running away. It was against protocol to leave things in the autoclave overnight, so I had to stay an hour and a half to get them out. But nothing else happened. I left the stuff on the floor, though. Didn't want a repeat of that. I don't have a story, but here is the one my wife likes to tell. She is a nurse and for a couple of years she was working night shift in the palliative care unit, which is the comfort care end-of-life unit. Patients in that unit are expected to die, or to be sent home or to a care home to die. Anyways, those rooms also had a radio, and according to her it happened a few times that a radio suddenly turned on, and within an hour or so a patient would pass on. One rather busy night, the radio turned on and my wife went into the room, stared into the darkness and said, "Cut that out. I don't have time for this shit." And the radio suddenly snapped off. No patient died during the rest of her shift, but one passed away shortly after she clocked out. I worked at a movie store in college. I was closing one night and just kind of doing a final walkthrough. I kept hearing what sounded like movie cases shuffling. I looked around thinking maybe someone had come in last minute, although I didn't hear the bell ring for when someone enters the store. Didn't see anyone. Then I hear what sounds like a movie fall off a shelf in the kids section. I go over and there's a movie laying on the ground and I shit you not, it was Casper. I work the front gate at a military installation. The night shift is super dull and quiet where I am at. For a while I noticed this dark green old Ford Bronco that would roll up. When I would stand out the gate shack, the car would do a 180 and leave. This happened about 2 to 3 times until I finally caught the license plate before it turned. I ran the numbers to my supervisor. He asked me if I was sure. I said I'm 100% certain. He tells me it couldn't be because the numbers led to a vehicle crash report that involved the exact same vehicle and plate number to which the driver had died and the vehicle was totaled. That shit made me want to switch to days. I worked in a mine in northern Ontario. There was a death on the 4,200 level a couple years previous to the incident. It was a normal day underground like any other. We were rehabbing a old working that had collapsed. 4,200 level was big. The drifts were 6 times 6 feet, but go on for kilometers in every direction. It was about midnight when we saw the mine rescue team with security rushing down the drift. Naturally, we dropped what we were doing and followed to see if we could help. We arrived to a guy who was as pale as a ghost. He didn't look hurt, but he was shaking uncontrollably. Mine rescue approached him and he wouldn't have it. He would scream, and not just any scream. It was terrifying hearing the screams. Like a person so consumed with fear. It had a tone to it that you wouldn't imagine could come from a person. Eventually he just stopped screaming and just sat there, awake but non-responsive. By now it was 3:30 a.m. and our shift was over. We couldn't leave him down there. We managed to get him on a stretcher that we could carry out. On our way out he kept saying, "The devil is on 42." Over and over again. About 2 years later, another incident report was read to us. The exact same thing. Exactly the same spot, but a different person. I don't believe they saw the devil, but it is always in the back of my mind when I'm on 42. Not me, but a friend used to work as a night custodian for an elementary school, which the building itself was rather old, built in the 40s maybe. He was the third shift guy, so he took over from the second shift guy at like 9 p.m. He was basically there to mop the floors and make sure no one broke in. If he got all of his stuff done, he was pretty much free to do whatever he wanted. Often after he finished doing his work, he'd go hang out in an office because there was a small TV to watch. He said things started off innocently enough. Lights turning on in classrooms where he knew they had been off previously. Cabinets and doors opening and closing on their own. He didn't pay much attention to it at first. He was sort of on the fence as to where he believed in paranormal activities, so he just shrugged it off as coincidences. At first, he would go and check the noises out. Sometimes he'd creep around and try to catch someone in the act, in case there was a way in that he didn't know about. After a month or so, he gave up looking and just learned to ignore it. He'd ask his boss about it and just get blown off. Over the coming months, things progressively got worse. Doors no longer closed on their own. They slammed shut. He heard noises like children playing, sometimes screaming. He'd find trash cans turned upside down. He'd have things thrown at him, but he would be clearly alone with nowhere for someone to hide and throw things at him. He'd contemplated quitting, but he was making good money for being nearly fresh out of high school, and he needed the money for family stuff, so he stuck with it. He'd come in, rush through his duties for the night as quickly as he could, and then go and sit in the office, where he'd turn the TV to where he could sit facing the door, and that's where he'd sit until the morning crew came in at 6 a.m. He didn't want to admit that he was scared shitless of being in that school by himself at night, so he tried to tough it out and made a lot of excuses to try and explain what was going on. The last straw for him was the night he was sitting in the office watching TV and felt someone grab the chair from behind and flip him over backward. There was clearly no one in the room and no way for anyone to get into the room without him seeing them. He picked up the office phone and called his boss at home in the middle of the night. Said he quit and he'd come back in the morning to turn his keys in. He was definitely a believer in the paranormal after that experience. He said that it wasn't until years later that he found out from someone who'd researched the history of the school before it was torn down that there used to be pool inside the school. A number of kids had drowned in over the early years of the school until the administration decided to finally expand the building, so they filled the pool in with concrete and expand over top of it. Used to work at IHOP. A cook before my time got shot and died during robbery. I would always hear someone in the kitchen, such as the spatulas clanking, but nobody would be in the kitchen. Once I saw a black figure in the back, figured it was the cook. When I went outside to the front of the restaurant, the cook was sitting outside smoking. There was no current orders either. Other co-workers experienced some stories. One of them said she felt pushed, but I can't speak on what I didn't see. I was working at a gas station at like 3 a.m. one night. A car pulled into the pump. Guy got out and started pumping. And then the car and dude just vanished. I was looking right at it, and it just popped out of existence. I told my boss the next day and she turned white as a sheet. She'd seen the same thing. Same exact description. Same car. Same pump. Same guy.